Now it's time for our analysis of Dean Goffin's work, Arise, My Soul, Arise, with Derick, Kane.
Well, Derick, thank you ever so much for joining us once again.
Pleasure.
On Fully Scored. And today we're going to be talking about a piece that you've chosen to look at from the festival series. Would you like to introduce what we're going to be looking at in this analysis?
Yeah, sure. The piece is by Dean Goffin, by Captain Dean Goffin, as he was. The Prelude and Fugue, Arise, My Soul, Arise. Published January 1958.
Fantastic. And there can't be many Prelude and Fugues published within the Salvation Army journals, can there?
There are fugal sections in pieces, but with the title Prelude and Fugue, to my knowledge, there is this one and a piece called Towards the Victory by Kenneth Downey.
So you chose this piece to look at. Why did you want to look at this specific piece?
I think it's one of these iconic pieces in Salvation Army repertoire. First of all, it relates to classical music, of course. Prelude and Fugues being back to J.S. Bach. Other composers since, of course. But the Prelude and Fugue gives us a little excursion, if you like, into classical writing, I think. I've always described this piece as a kind of piece of Bach or piece of classical music or a piece of Mozart for band. Don't just think brass band when you're playing or rehearsing this piece.
So, could you give us a little bit of context into when this piece was written and what the journals may have looked like at that point to have this piece come along?
Well, I mean, Dean Goffin, as we know, didn't write loads and loads of pieces, particularly for a festival series. But what he did write, I think, are iconic pieces. Symphony of Thanksgiving, My Strength, My Tower, for example. But I think there's a kind of common thread between these pieces and this one. I think, to my mind, they give a very academic demonstration of music writing. Borne out by the title of the Prelude and Fugue. But I think if you look at other pieces, My Strength, My Tower, for example, it's very academic in its makeup and its structure. So I think this piece would have stood out when it was written to the other music that was coming out round about that time.
So, the tune is Darwell's. Could you tell us a little bit about that melody and perhaps some other facts that you know about it?
Yeah, it's a lovely melody. If you look at the shape of it, where it's got that rising arpeggio movement, I think it lends itself to development, to variation. And if you look at the score, which I'm looking at right now, the way he treats that opening of Darwell's, Darwell's as some people know it. I think it's been printed as both over the years.
Oh, that's an
Yes, it's been printed with an E and also printed with an A. So a lovely tune, and it just demands that lovely treatment. It's a good tune to play, it's a good tune to sing. You know, that opening statement, bam, 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 bam. You know, it's a lovely shape. And of course we get this all the way through. And if you look at the opening bars, bar 1, bar 2, bar 3, bar 4, bar 5, bar 6, bar 7, all follow the same pattern of that arpeggio movement of the first 5 notes of the tune. So from a study point of view, that's a good thing to note. Then we get a little descending passage, and then he's back to the same thing again, 2 bars later, and we keep getting this repetition of the first 5 notes of Darwell's, or Darwell's, whichever you prefer. The tempos in this piece are an interesting discussion, I think. Not so much for the opening, but certainly when we come to the come to the fugue section, I think the prelude kind of speaks for itself. But it also has some beautiful little counter melody, but also based on that opening fragment, which is in quaver time. Bum, 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 bum. And then later on we have the little euphonium thing that comes in at section B, and then the cornets, da da dee da da, in crotchet time. So again, you've got that development already within as you say, within a very short space of time. The development of a prelude from a quaver movement, graceful, into an even more graceful legato crotchet treatment of the same motif or same theme.
And is there anything else musically we should be looking at in the section between those, in section A?
Yeah, I think in a piece like this, I mean, in music generally, we sometimes don't know what to do with staccato and particularly accented notes. There's a bit of a tradition when we see an accent, we play it as hard as possible. But in a classical context, I don't think that would be the case. It's more of a push on the note rather than a harder tongue experience that we tend to associate with a brass band, especially in this graceful prelude movement. I think we shorten notes too much in Salvation Army brass band playing. I think often the notes get too short, and I think by lengthening a note you can achieve a lot of things. You can achieve a fullness of sound. You can even achieve an accent by just lengthening the note and making it stand out the texture, rather than just by this always tonguing harder when we see an accent. But again, still with gracefulness and still with a bit of length. So we're playing ba ya ba 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 and not da 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 da. You know, there's a difference of just pecking a note short and playing a note shorter. Or as I'll say to groups, the shortest notes still have a note value. Okay, and I think that aspect can be brought out in this first section with the accents and staccato.
So that takes us through to section C, where the music changes style a little bit. Could you talk us through this next section here?
Yeah, and there's also a lift in tempo. We started the piece around 116, and I know it's all relative and it's all approximate. It wouldn't be right if we had every piece the same. There'd be no point of recording another version of Beethoven 5 or Beethoven 9 if it was the same as every other one. However, there is a lift here at section C, score-wise, taking us from 116 to 132. So a little lift in tempo. The texture's still quite thin, though. You see there's no trombones playing, there's not many cornets playing to start with, and we've got this little middle band thing going on with a delicate euphonium in the background. And it's a good example of where you've got the quavers in the middle band against the quavers, euphonium, staccato. Okay, so I think full length for middle band, which lets the euphonium still play staccato, but not too short. Okay, but I would say play them delicate would be my take as a baritone score. That would achieve the feeling of shortness from the horns and the euphonium where you need to. There's one or two little lifts. I think they just need to be subtle. They don't need to be surging crescendos and decrescendos. I think it's just a little subtle lift where the notes lift and fall back. I often use an expression about folding back the dynamic, which I quite like. You know, just fold back the dynamic. Rather than just, it needs to be quieter. Because often what happens with a band, we see a crescendo, we do get loud too soon, and a decrescendo we do the same. We get too quiet too soon. We get too quiet too soon. Whereas the thought of folding back a decrescendo, to me, gives a more subtle approach to getting quieter. But one aspect pointing out is the next bit coming up, where we've got 3 bars of staccato crotchets for the whole band. Now it's 3 bars, in my view, of plucked strings. Okay? But still within note value. And to play 9 staccato crotchets in a row with every part, including percussion, is a challenge in my view. It's something that looks easy on the score, but you try and get all your cornets, all your horns, baritones, trombones, euphonium, basses, and percussion playing exactly 9 notes in a row. It becomes a challenge, and it's on a crescendo to the loudest part of the piece so far.
You can guarantee with 9 out of 10 bars as well, that'll rush, won't it?
That's the other thing.
Closer together.
Can you hold a tempo without anticipating the middle crotchet? Because that's the one that'll be anticipated. Da, 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 da. That'll be the second crotchet.
One to look out for then.
Yes.
Players. So that takes us to sections E and F, and some very similar thematic material to the opening.
Yes, there is nothing new here on the score until we get to the close. Letter F. You've got to judge in letter F the rallentando as opposed to 4 bars later the allegando. So if that rall becomes too extreme, you've then got a very extreme allegando tempo. And a good sound on the last chord, no cornets. Okay, they suddenly drop off. They've played all the way up there, they're playing all the way through it fortissimo, and all of a sudden there's no cornets for the last chord. Also worth rehearsing, where you suddenly got, if you like, middle and bottom band sound for your final chord of the movement. An interesting little composing technique.
Yeah, you can rehearse all you like though. It's never going to sound as good without cornets, is it?
Well, some bands. That's as far as I'm going to go on that.
So at letter G we have our fugue, a really interesting and exciting musical technique. Could you tell us a little bit about fugue and where it comes from? Maybe some of the main composers we might associate with a fugue.
You know, we think of J.S. Bach, who wrote lots of preludes, lots of fugues. He was writing them all the time. And if you want somewhere to go to study the fugue, well, he's the go-to person. That's where every classical composer from his time onwards went to look at the structure of the fugue. And this is a good example of an academic fugue, where its structure is clear, cornets, horns, baritones, euphonium, bass. You know, there's in 4 clear sections. If you want to study, if you look at the score, it's easy to see who's playing what. You've got to achieve a semblance of sameness from these fugue entries, albeit within different dynamic frameworks. I think, Matthew, one interesting thing is the opening tempo of this. I don't know many bands who have started this off at crotchet 96. I don't even know if I would, or if I have. I've conducted it a few times. You don't want to go too quick, because you've got to just glance ahead as a conductor, and a final excel which is taking you up to 144 and then 84 minimum finally. So it's taking you up to 160s, 170 marks. That's a big shift from the beginning of a prelude in 96 crotchet that ends up in crotchet somewhere like 168, 190, 172. So there's a big bit of work to be done here by the conductor to measure this. I wouldn't go far off the 96. I would tend to be around 104, which gives it a little bit more movement. Cornet's got a piano start, horns, flugeln, mezzo piano start, baritones, euphonium, mezzo forte start. So there's little lifts happening there as well. So the cornets need to be a little bit more distant, if you like, in its start. The horns is given a bit more dynamic, and as more players join, he's upped the dynamic of the fugue to the mezzo forte, to finally the basses come in at 40. So there's work to be done there as players and conductors. But generally, he's up to tempo to match the score getting more complex or thicker texture.
What do you think it is about this motif used for the fugue that makes it work so well?
You're always attached to the tune in this piece right from the very start. You're always attached to the tune da walls. Da dee da 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 da, right from the very beginning, and all the way through. You don't lose contact with that. And I think probably the best fugues achieve that. You're always related, you're always attached to the melodic fragments of the melodic theme. A great entry here from the bar before I for trombones and cornets. A little fanfare figure where you've got that big lift into section I to and I think the loudest part of the piece. I don't think there's been a fortissimo. There's been one early on, but not a brassy fortissimo. There's a fortissimo at the end of the prelude, but a more sonorous fortissimo. But now we have a more brassy fortissimo with the trumpety sounds, the middle horn sounds, playing it, the fortissimo. But again, he does that and takes you straight back to the trombones, bum 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 bum. But again, it never takes you away. But we're not still on full melody yet. We're still on melodic fragments, where the trombones have that job of sonority against the horns and cornet delicate patterns in the background. And also like it where players where parts don't happen for every bar. For example, he cuts the basses out for a couple and brings them in. 1, 2, 3 and 4 of I. He has the basses full on for fortissimo, then he takes the basses out of it. Whereas if you're writing, you're normally thinking, what's the bass part? No, he just takes the bass out and gives you trombone, puts the job in middle band, and then goes back to fortissimo with full band. I think and he does that on 2 or 3 occasions in this leading up to section K.
And then section J, we have a key change and go into concert D flat major.
I love the way he plays around with the keys. I mean, a fugue, in its academic perception, a prelude and fugue rather, is something that's all in the same key. But there's development within it. In this little one here, where he takes us into a new key at section J, then he takes us later on, about 16 bars later, into a one that you've got to be very careful with. And if there's going to be a wrong note in this piece, it's going to happen here. Bar 5 and 6 of K. People forget they're playing in G flat or a D flat, or even in the trombone there's been a D flat, and then following with an E natural.
It's going to hurt, isn't
Yeah,
it?
that's why if there's a black spot on this piece for an accident, it's bar 5 and 6 of K.
Bear in mind.
Yeah, that's worth a highlight pen for any player. No matter how good you are, how good your memory is, just mark it. And that takes us through to L, where we get more of this episodic stuff happening still with the same fragment. Bam, 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 bam. Amazing how many times this is used. All right, it's only a 7.5 minute piece, but I haven't added up. But if you added up how many times that fragment, if you took it out of the piece, there wouldn't be a piece. That's quite incredible, isn't it?
It really is.
You know, that shows the real talent of a composer who can keep that working. You know, I think of Beethoven 5, you think, how long can he keep that motif going for? Well, the answer is minutes and minutes. Ba, 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 ba. You think, he can't keep that going? Yes, he can. Minutes and minutes and minutes of it. Minutes later, you're still hearing it. And so here we are again, minutes later, we're still hearing bam, 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 bam.
Section M as well. How unusual is that 4 bars long? It's a short little section, isn't it? And don't forget the very important triple piano triangle notes as well.
A triangle, yes, I'm afraid to tell you, is a musical instrument. And there's a way of hitting it that sounds like a bit of metal, and there's a way of playing it that sounds like a beautiful musical instrument. And that's what's required here. I'd even say to triangle, a step up from 3 Ps would be fine for me. The careful notice here, accel and crescendo, poco a poco. Not too much too soon would be my viewpoint. In the dynamic, because if you up that dynamic here, if you look, you've got a long way to go to the end of this piece. So I think a controlled measure of the dynamic through here, and also a controlled measure of the accelerando. The next tempo marking is 132 at letter O. So it's still not over quick. And then we start to get the scalic movement up towards letter P. And at some point here, you need to decide where you're going to hit your tune the bar. Now the minims give you a good lead for tune the bar because they give you 2 clear beats. Bum, 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 bum. 1 and 2. Da, dee, da, 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 da. They give you a clear indication. So I think you choose one of these points, maybe the bar before P for a little move into 2, or maybe a couple of bars into P.
So that takes us through into section Q. Once again, we're cranking up the tempo, but quite dramatically dropping the volume in.
Yeah, we are, and it's not an easy thing to do, but it gives you a little respite before coming on to the end section. It is very dramatic. When you think it's right down to piano, mezzo piano, and then four bars later, there's a fortissimo. But even that, though, we don't want it to sound like the final fortissimo. There's different ways of approaching a fortissimo. As I said earlier, there's the sonorous one, there's the full-blooded one, and there's the one that heads beyond. But at this point, we just want a good full sound from the band, but good clear articulation from cornets and horns, and the answering on baritone, euphonium, basses to be as articulate as it is on the upper band sounds. Not so easy to get it down the bottom end of the band, but it's a good thing to aim for, to get it as good as you're hearing it, the clarity from top end of the band and bottom end of the band.
Excellent. And would you be able to talk us through the way that this music sort of wraps itself up with this very grandiose?
Yeah. I think you've just described it. It's got to sound, grandiose. But we still don't have bam 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 ba da 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 da. We still don't have that. We still have it in sections. You can't sing along.
Not going to be heard if you do.
No.
So.
And then we're heading towards the end of the piece. Letter S, a nice drop in dynamic here. Underplay the mezzo forte for better effect. We're sometimes not good at that. And also the whole band. The effect of a whole band drop in dynamic is fantastic. If it happens, it only needs 2 or 3 players not to do that, and you haven't got the effect. So I would say underplay that mezzo forte. One, it gives you resting time.
Yes, yeah.
As a player, when you're managing the piece. 2, it gives the listener a great contrast, and it just gives you that bit of drama. Right, drama's not always found in the loudest dynamics. I know we think it is, but it's sometimes often found in the quieter dynamics, especially ones that are subito and happen uniformly throughout a band. So I think underplay that. Don't, again, not too much too soon, rising up to the fortissimo ending of the band here.
And a really interesting last chord. Nothing too high, nothing too brash. A very earthy, grounded.
It's very reminiscent of a Triumph of Peace last chord, low cornets, and we tend not to give cornets a low note on a last chord. Eric Ball did it, and there's 1 or 2 other examples, and this is a good example of it, where it's just about the fullness of the sonority of the chord. It's not about the brightness of the top B flat, even soprano cornet. How many pieces does soprano cornet end up on a low B flat? If you're writing this now, that would not look like that. But again, to me, it references the classical, almost the organist playing the last chord. The organist doesn't look for what's the highest notes I can play, yeah? Looks what's the most sonorous sound I can get from the band. Still, I believe, an iconic piece that deserves really good attention in our repertoire.
Thank you ever so much, Derick, for that insight.
It's been a pleasure.